Welcome back. We are continuing our reading now of the Grand Inquisitor chapter, and we are continuing now with the Grand Inquisitor's critique of the first question asked to Jesus Christ, and that is to say, why don't you turn rocks into bread? He continues, so that in truth, thou didst thyself lay the foundation for the destruction of thy kingdom, and no one is more to blame for it. Yet, what was offered thee? There are three powers alone able to conquer and to hold captive forever the conscience of these impotent rebels for their happiness. Those forces are miracle, mystery, and authority. And we'll pause, and you want to put that in your notes. That notion of, if you have these three things, you can control anyone. We think about, again, Plato's tyrannical leader. Miracle, mystery, authority. Thou hast rejected all three and hast set the example for doing so. When the wise and dread spirit, again, it's never Satan, it's never the devil. When the wise and dread spirit set thee on the pinnacle of the temple and said to thee, so here we are now for the second one, right? If thou wouldst know whether thou art the Son of God, then cast thyself down, for it's written, the angels shall hold him up, lest he fall and bruise himself, and thou shalt know then whether thou art the Son of God, and shalt prove then how great is thy faith in thy Father. But thou didst refuse, and wouldst not cast thyself down. Oh, of course thou didst proudly and well like God, but the weak, unruly race of men, are they gods? Oh, thou didst know then that in taking one step, in making one movement to cast thyself down, thou wouldst be tempting God and have lost all thy faith in him, and wouldst have been dashed to pieces against that earth which thou didst come to save. And the wise spirit that tempted thee would have rejoiced. But I ask again, are there many like thee? And couldst thou believe for one moment that men too could face such a temptation? Is the nature of men such that they can reject miracle, and at the great moments of their life, the moments of their deepest, most agonizing spiritual difficulties, cling only to the free verdict of the heart? In other words, he's going to argue it's an impossibility to live out the moral, for example, that the ethic that Thoreau is suggesting in Walden. It's just too great. It's too impossible. Oh, thou didst know that thy deed would be recorded in books, would be handed down to remote times and the utmost ends of the earth. And thou didst hope that men, following thee, would cling to God and not ask for a miracle. But thou didst not know that when man rejects miracle, he rejects God too. For man seeks not so much God as the miraculous. And as man cannot bear to be without the miraculous, he will create new miracles of his own for himself, and will worship deeds of sorcery and witchcraft, though he might be 100 times over a rebel, heretic, and infidel. Thou didst not come down from the cross when they shouted to thee, mocking and reviling thee. Come down from the cross, and we will believe that thou art he. Thou didst not come down, for again, thou wouldst not enslave man by a miracle, and didst crave faith given freely, not based on miracle. Thou didst crave for free love, and not the base raptures of the slave before the might that has overawed him forever. But thou didst think too highly of men therein, for they are slaves, of course, though rebellious by nature. Look round and judge. 15 centuries have passed. Look upon them. Now this is maybe the most disturbing part of Ivan's poem, because he says, let's just study history for a few seconds, and let's just pay attention to the ways that people have either followed or have not been able to follow your view of freedom. Whom hast thou raised up to thyself? I swear, man is weaker and baser by nature than thou hast believed him. Can he do what thou didst? By showing him so much respect, thou didst, as it were, cease to feel for him, for thou didst ask far too much from him, thou who hast loved him more than thyself. And then there's an exclamation mark there. The ironies are just dripping, of course, for Ivan as he speaks this. Respecting him less, thou would have asked less of him. Thou would have been more like love, for his burden would have been lighter. He is weak and vile. What though he is everywhere now rebelling against our power, and proud of his rebellion. In other words, people are, trying to rebel against the church. This written, of course, in a time right before, well, nature will call it the death of God, period, right? That is to say, when humans start to reject the institution of the church and religion. And yet, he says, it's the pride of a child and a schoolboy. They are little children rioting and barring out the teacher at school, but their childish delight will end. It will cost them dear. They will cast down temples and drench the earth with blood. I mean, this will take us to Yeats's second coming, right? The blood-dimmed tide. The notion that in the end the best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate, right? That critical idea, the intensity, that notion that we're going to all kill ourselves. We go back and take a look at my comments for Yeats's second coming. We're playing a very similar game here, right? But they will see at last, notice the sight, the foolish children that, though they are rebels, they are impotent rebels, unable to keep up their own rebellion. Bathed in their foolish tears, they will recognize at last that he who created them rebels must have meant to mock at them. They will say this in despair, and their utterance will be blasphemy, which will make them more unhappy still. For man's nature cannot bear blasphemy, and in the end always avenges it on itself. It's a compelling idea, and this in many ways will obviously give the answer to the question, why is it that so many of these revolutions, as we saw them, Marxist, communist, socialist, whatever you want to call them, of the 20th century, why is it that so many of them, all of them failed, and here it is, right? He'll give the answer. And so, unrest, confusion, and unhappiness, that is the present lot of man after thou didst bear so much for their freedom. And then again, there's the exclamation point. Lots of exclamation points through this. As Ivan, you can tell he's getting kind of worked up, right, as he's presenting his poem. The great prophet tells, in vision and in image, that he saw all those who took part in the first resurrection, and that they were of each tribe 12,000. We're speaking now of the book of Revelation. But if there were so many of them, they must have been not men but gods. They had borne thy cross. They had endured scores of years in the barren, hungry wilderness, living upon locusts and roots. And thou mayest indeed point with pride at those children of freedom, of free love, of free and splendid sacrifice for thy name. But remember that they were only some thousands. And what of the rest? And how are the other meek ones to blame? Because they could not endure what the strong have endured? How is the weak soul to blame that it's unable to receive such terrible gifts? Canst thou have simply come to the elect and for the elect? Be it so. It is a mystery and we cannot understand it. And if it's a mystery, we too have a right to preach a mystery and to teach them that it's not the free judgment of their hearts, not love that matters, but mystery which they must follow blindly, even against their conscience. So we have done. We've corrected thy work and have founded it upon miracle, mystery, and authority. And men rejoiced that they were again led like sheep, and that the terrible gift that had brought them such suffering was at last lifted from their hearts. Were they right teaching them this? Speak. And now all of a sudden he's ready for Christ to respond. In other words, it's as if first he told him, I don't want you to say anything because you can't add to whatever it was you said before. Now he demands it. Speak. Did not we love mankind so meekly, acknowledging their feebleness, lovingly lightening their burden, and permitting their weak nature even sin with our sanction? Why hast thou come now to hinder us? Notice how he continues to say this. This is the genius of this poem, right? Because it's obvious that in Ivan's critique, and Alyosha's going to say this, he's going to say, wait a minute, you're making a pretty profound argument for the notion of the power of freedom. Anyone who is upset about this idea has to say, well, yeah, but I believe in free will. I believe in the right to choose to do good over evil, no, even if I'm hungry. And of course, Ivan will, through the Grand Inquisitor, say, oh, really? That's really how humans are? How do you explain the Auschwitz? How do you explain the gulags? How do you explain the killing fields of Cambodia? And his answer is, I'll tell you how we explain it. We explain it because this is what humans really are. Now, of course, this is a disturbing reversal of what Thoreau will argue that we should be. But although you'll remember that Thoreau in Walden says Thus say the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation, echoing obviously the sentiments here, right? He says, why hast thou come now to hinder us? And why dost thou look silently and searchingly at me with thy mild eyes? Be angry. I don't want thy love, for I love thee not. And what use is it for me to hide anything from thee? Don't I know to whom I am speaking? All that I can say is known to thee already, and it's for me to conceal from thee from thee our mystery. Perhaps it is thy will to hear it from my lips. Listen then, we are not working with thee, but with him. Obviously, we're speaking now about the true Grand Inquisitor, right? That is our mystery. It's long, 8 centuries since we have been on his side and not on thine. Just 8 centuries ago, we took from him what thou didst reject with scorn, that last gift he offered thee. This is now the third, right? The third offering from the Matthew 4 passage. Showing thee all the kingdoms of the earth. We took from him Rome and the sword of Caesar, and proclaimed ourselves sole rulers of the earth, though hitherto we have not been able to complete our work. Now this is of course going to be the great utopian dream, right? So here we come now to this idea, and many will argue that this is fundamentally the greatest criticism of Marxist communism, and Dostoevsky was a prophet in this regard. He kind of saw it coming on the horizon. Here's going to be the great critique. But whose fault is that? Oh, the work, and we can't help but hear this line and think about Conrad's Heart of Darkness, the work, and the famous grove scene there, right? The horrors of that idea. Oh, the work is only the beginning, but it has begun. It has long to await completion, and the earth has yet much to suffer, but we shall triumph and shall be Caesars, and then we shall plan the universal happiness of man. And of course, I mean, this will sound very much like the end of the Communist Manifesto. It's an interesting thing. I mean, go back and look at our lectures on Marx and the Communist Manifesto. It's an amazing thing how few students actually have read Communist Manifesto all the way to the end and heard what is the promise. Well, of course, the promise is happiness for all men. The Grand Inquisitor will continue with this idea. But thou mayest have taken even then the sword of Caesar. Why didst thou reject that last gift? Hast thou accepted that last counsel of the mighty Spirit? Thou wouldst have accomplished all that man seeks on earth. That is, someone to worship, someone to keep his conscience, and some means of uniting all in one unanimous and harmonious ant-heap. For the craving for the universal unity is the third and last anguish of men. This is what we all long for, he says. We long, desperately we long, for some kind of collective. Now, obviously, we'll put this alongside our study of Ayn Rand's Fountainhead or Atlas Shrugged, and we'll pay attention to that critique. Of course, that's Rand's critique as well of communism. Or we can think about Orwell's critique in Animal Farm and elsewhere, 1984. But here it is. This is what we all want, he says, to be a harmonious ant-heap. Now, of course, this is the criticism of Plato's ideal state, ideal republic, right? Where we're all one big happy family, everyone doing their one job and all of that. And again, you can go back to our lectures on Plato's Republic. The Grand Inquisitor continues. Mankind as a whole has always striven to organize a universal state. There have been many great nations with great histories, but the more highly they were developed, the more unhappy they were, for they felt more accurately than other people the craving for worldwide union. And then he's going to give a couple of examples. The great conquerors, Timurs and Genghis Khan, whirled like hurricanes over the face of the earth, striving to subdue its people, and they too were but the unconscious expression of the same craving for universal unity. Hast thou taken the world and Caesar's purple, thou wouldst have founded the universal state and have given universal peace. In other words, he says to Christ, you had the chance to do this. Why didn't you do this? That was the third opportunity for you. Why wouldn't you take it and create one great world order? For who can rule men if not he who holds their conscience and their bread in his hands? It's the only way to do it. You've got to brainwash them, and you've got to control everything about their consumption, what they're going to eat. And if you can do that, you can control them, he says. We, he says now, notice it's not I, it's we have taken the sword of Caesar, and in taking it, of course, have rejected thee and followed him, of course, the dread spirit, the devil, right? Oh, ages are yet to come of the confusion of free thought, of their science and cannibalism. For having begun to build their Tower of Babel without us, they will end, of course, with cannibalism. And there's such dark irony here, of course, that a close study of what happened in the Ukraine because of the communist, the revolution of 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution, there was a lot of cannibalism. And we know this is true. I mean, it's sad that it's not reported more regularly when one begins to speak in, certain kind of pining, nostalgic views of socialism and Marxism and communism of the 20th century. That's what happened, and here's the prediction, right? The cannibalism. He continues, but then the beast will crawl to us and lick our feet and spatter them with tears of blood, and we shall sit upon the beast and raise the cup, and on it will be written mystery. But then and only then, the reign of peace and happiness will come for men. Thou art proud of thine elect, but thou hast only the elect, while we give rest to all. And besides, how many of those elect, those mighty ones who could become elect, have grown weary waiting for thee, and have transferred and will transfer the powers of their spirit and the warmth of their heart to the other camp, and end by raising their free banner against thee? Thou didst thyself lift up thy banner, but with us all will be happy, and will no more rebel nor destroy one another as under thy freedom. Oh, we shall persuade them that they will only become free when they renounce their freedom to us and submit to us. And then he asks the rhetorical question, and shall we be right, or shall we be lying? They will be convinced that we are right, for they will remember the horrors of slavery and the confusion to which thy freedom brought them. Freedom, free thought, and science will lead them into such straits, and will bring them face to face with such marvels and insoluble mysteries, that some of them, the fierce and rebellious, will destroy themselves. Others, rebellious but weak, will destroy one another, while the rest, weak and unhappy, will crawl fawning to our feet and whine to us, yes, you are right, you alone possess his mystery, and we come back to you. Save us from ourselves. Now, of course, this is deeply disturbing and yet powerful, right? As he continues, receiving bread from us, they will see clearly that we take the bread made by their hands from them to give it to them without any miracle. They will see that we do not change the stones to bread, but in truth they will be more thankful for taking it from our hands than for the bread itself. And there's an exclamation mark here that it defies logic, and yet he says this is the way it's going to work. For they will remember only too well that in old days, without our help, even the bread they made turned to stones in their hands, while since they have come back to us, the very stones have turned to bread in their hands. Too well will they know the value of complete submission. And we do. We look back, don't we, to the time of Hitler and his those speeches where everyone is standing. We look at what's happened in North Korea, and when we get to see some of those video, and we're like, how in heaven's name can people be so easily manipulated? Well, here it is, right? The Grand Inquisitor says it. This is what human nature is. We long for this, regardless of what Christ or Thoreau has to say about freedom. We long. This is what we long for, submission, right? And until men know that, they will be unhappy. Who is most to blame for their not knowing it? Speak. And notice again, he's trying to get Christ to respond. Christ will never speak throughout this entire dialogue, right? Who scattered the flock and sent it astray on unknown paths? But the flock will come together again and will submit once more, and then it will be once for all. Then we shall give them the quiet, humble happiness of weak creatures, such as they are by nature. This notion then that everyone will be equal, everyone will be happy, there will be no sadness or sorrow anymore. Oh, he says, we shall persuade them at last not to be proud, for thou didst lift them up, and thereby taught them to be proud. We shall show them that they are weak, that they are only pitiful children, but that childlike happiness is the sweetest of all. They will become timid and will look to us and huddle close to us in fear as chicks to the hen. They will marvel at us and will be awe-stricken before us and will be proud at our being so powerful and clever that we have been able to subdue such a turbulent flock of thousands of millions. They will tremble impotently before our wrath. Their minds will grow fearful. They will be quick to shed tears like women and children, but they will be just as ready at a sign from us to pass to laughter and rejoicing, to happy mirth and childish song. Yes, we shall set them to work, but in their leisure hours we shall make their life like a child's game, with children's songs and innocent dance. And of course, this manipulation by the media to control us in one large anthill is exactly what Orwell's talking about in 1984. And of course, alas, all we have to do is just study ourselves, don't we, in the ways in which we can be so easily manipulated by the technologies that we can hold in our hand, that we can just zone everything else out in the world away, and we don't have to actually live anymore. He says, that's what we all long for. Oh, he says, we shall allow them even sin. They are weak and helpless, and they will love us like children because we allow them to sin. We shall tell them that every sin will be expiated if it is done with our permission, that we will allow them to sin because we love them, and the punishment for these sins we take upon ourselves. In other words, humans don't really want to be called to a higher standard. We want to be able to be told, you're fine just the way you are, and just enjoy the life that you have. We'll take care of you. You needn't concern yourself at all with your own freedom. And we shall take it upon ourselves, and they will adore us as their saviors who have taken on themselves their sins before God. And they will have no secrets from us. Here it is, right? The totalitarian state